right now you should see a file on your screen that I shared with you. And I think this is going to be fun this morning. So this is a very simple example that I have set up. But if you download this file, you will see an animation of some points and bars. And this is a simple example that we're going to get started with. For those of you who might be new to the program or haven't attended a webinar, my name is Pamela Schultz, and I am the voice of a lot of the videos, and I do a lot of the support for the program. As with the webinar so far, I've had a lot of fun preparing for this particular webinar and pulling some examples together for you. I have the chat window open and the Q&A window open for any questions that come up along the way. Feel free to ask. One of the things that I really do love about DataGraph is how you can do things that are relatively complicated from a computer programming point of view, but to do this in DataGraph can be very easy to do more complicated things. And animation is definitely one of those things where it may seem tricky initially, but I think once you get the hang of it, there's a lot of really interesting things that you can do with animation. What I want to do first is take you through this file and show you how I created this sort of step-by-step along the way. You can see this image here moving. We also have the moving bars. I don't know if any of you follow Reddit, but moving bars became so popular on Reddit over the, it was maybe, I don't know, 5 months ago or so, that they actually banned them from being posted because almost every post on the Reddit Data is Beautiful thread was a moving bar or bar chart race, as they call them. So people love to see these animations of data. And we'll talk about how we do this in DataGraph. And we're not, this isn't a special template or a special command that we came up with specifically for this, but rather it's just using the machinery that's built into DataGraph to create this animation. And so with that, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with this simple example because I really want to make sure you understand how these things are put together. So if you're adding in your own data and something's not working right, you can hopefully tease it apart and get it working for you. And then we will get into using the COVID data that I have downloaded. That's in another animation that many of you have probably seen, and show you how that machinery is then used to create that animation. So let me go ahead and going to start with, actually this is a new functionality. I know you're seeing my whole screen right now, but one of the things that that we have added in DataGraph, I believe this is in the last release, is a presentation mode. So I wanted to test this quickly here. And so now you should be seeing an image that shows you the animation portion of the DataGraph screen. So in the file that I posted, this online example, all of the graphs are set up to depend on this animation variable. And this is just zooming in on that animation variable. Because I haven't used this presentation mode before, it would be great if someone could confirm on the chat that you can see a screen that says these graphs depend on the animation variable. If someone could just confirm on the chat that you can in fact see that. Perfect. Okay, just again, I tried to do this in a test mode, but it wasn't testing the way that I wanted to, so I wasn't able to confirm for sure this would work. So great. This is actually something that I am really excited about, this presentation mode, because then you can do presentations from right within DataGraph. Anyway, back to animation. So what you see here is, again, this zoom in on this bottom left-hand corner within DataGraph. And I've pointed out where you click play in order to see these images animate. A couple of things I want to point out here. You have where it says animate, the letter T is what we have by default. So the name of the animation variable is called T. if you're really new to DataGraph and you haven't used variables before, you can set up your own variables as a variety of different things. They're used to create constants, but variables are, in some sense, we use the term more generally to be aspects of the program that you can reuse in other places. So it's not just a numeric variable set to some letter representation, but it can also be color schemes. Fonts are set up in the variable, so you can use the same one over and over again. Anyway, the animation variable is set up by default to be the letter T. You can click in this box, you can change it to whatever you would like it to be. The duration of the animation is set in seconds, and you can change this right here. It's set to 20 seconds by default, so you can set the exact duration of the entire animation. The range of the variable is here. Here I'm just going from 0 to 5. It can be an integer or it can be a continuous variable. We're going to use in these animations continuous variables. And there is the slider built in, so you can change the variable interactively, or you can hit the play button to actually have the animation play. And notice that right above the play button is the symbol for making the movie from these, and we'll demonstrate that. So for any of these animations, we can make a movie from them in order to create an MP4 file that you can then share. Okay, so now I'm going to go out of animation mode, or sorry, out of presentation mode, start a new DataGraph file, bring this onto the screen that I'm sharing with you. Okay. Oh, actually, I don't want to full screen that. Let me just, there we go. So here is a brand new file within DataGraph. And again, I want to just build the machinery that is used to create the example file that you have a bit step by step. So first of all, I have this animation variable. What I did in the file that you have is it's set to be from 0 to 5. And again, I can scroll the slider to change the value of it, or hit play to have it change continuously over this duration. Actually here, I guess it's set to 10 seconds. The first example that you have in your file is very simply just to illustrate, again, really the concept of variables. For those of you already familiar with this, this may be something that is, again, something you're sort of comfortable already doing. For those of you who might be newer to the program, what I did was I just added a points command to my screen. Let me go ahead and give this a color so you can see this better. And by default, when you add a points command from the toolbar, it simply draws a point at 1 and 1. So you can specify different values here to type this in. So right now I'm changing the value on the scale, but because of the way DataGraph is just adjusting the scale around the point, you don't see anything really changing. Okay, but we'll fix that. So first of all, I changed my Y value to 2, and I'm going to change now my X value to T. Again, you don't maybe see too much happening, but if I hit my play button, you'll see that the axis is changing, and that's because the value of X is changing. What oftentimes you want to do when creating animations is we want to fix the axis range so that you can actually see the movement and the axis is not jittering around. So to do that, again, for those of you who maybe not as familiar with the program, we have axis settings that you expand open. And the way that DataGraph works, you just include values that you want to see within the range. So if I make this 0 to 10, now I move go ahead and put this on loop so that it will go. Now I move my point and you can see the point moving because my axis range is set. Again, a very simple example showing you how we can just animate this one single point. Now, the next example that's in this file is a bit more complicated, but it's using, again, just the machinery that's within DataGraph. And I'm going to go ahead and rather than typing all these numbers in, I just pasted in the X and Y columns from the example file that you have. And what I did here is I started by just plotting these two columns. We'll plot this on a line. And what I want to animate is a point that's going to move along that line, along that trajectory. My actual data is located at the points that you see here, but I want a point that moves all along this line. To do that, I'm going to use interpolation. DataGraph has a built-in column for doing a variety of different mathematical operations on data, and it's called the plot action column. So if you go to the other menu, click plot action, you get an interface over here that shows you a place to enter an X column, a Y column. There's these different actions that you can do. And depending on the action, there may be other options as to how you do these computations. And I may have said, I don't know if I said integrate or interpolate, but just to be clear, we're interpolating between these points. So I can use the menu to choose my X and Y. You can also just drag these. Oops, actually that was not the way that I wanted that to do that. There we go. I dragged my X and dropped it. Now I'm dragging my Y and dropping it. So I'm using my columns that I have here as the input to this process. And let me see my value that I have. So what I want to do when I'm interpolating, so change this action to interpolate, is I need to tell this plot action column, where do you want to interpolate this value? And to do that, I'm going to create another column. You'll see this in the file that we added, or that's in the example that you have. Let me add a column divider just to keep these two sections separate. And in my interpolated column, I want to use the value for t that I'm going to be plotting in my graph. So I can actually take values for variables and I can type them in to my data table, because again, it represents a number just like any other variable. So I'm going to put the t value at t as a value in this location column and select it as my column that I'm interpolating from. So I could here actually just type in values. For example, if I type in the value of 4, I'm going to get something between 9 and 15, because again, that's in my data. If I type in 0, I will get back a 5, because that's the first, that is the actual value that for y when x is equal to 0. Again, I just want to use this value for t. Now I have a value that within my data table, that as I change my slider for t, this outputs the interpolated value for y at that location. So again, we input our data, our x and our y line. We are specifying the location that we want to interpolate that data at. And let me go ahead and try and make this similar to the file that you have. I have my X location here and then my Y location. And I just want to simply plot this as a point. Oh, actually, we'll do this as not a line. We'll do a point. Go ahead and add a color to this. Now what you'll see is as I move the value for t, that value for y that's coming out of my plot action column is along that line, because it's interpolating in between it. If I hit play, then you will see that value of the dot move along. Now, I'm not sure how well in terms of going over the webinar, how smooth the animations will look. These animations should, for the most part, look pretty smooth when you're doing them on your screen. When you make a movie, however, they'll look even better. So one of the things that if you have your system being taxed at all in any way, there can be sometimes a little bit of jitter as you're playing the animation on the screen, just to be aware of that. But what if I created this movie and I'm happy with it and I want to export this as an MP4 file? This is really easy to do. So I can just go over to this animation variable and above the play button, click on this movie export icon. And when you click that, a create movie window will pop up. There's a couple of options here. Basically, the option of do you want this to be retina quality or not retina quality? You'll notice that that will affect the size of the graph that you're outputting, or sorry, the size of the movie that you're outputting. And so I'm going to, just so this is quick, I'll make this a not retina quality. It's actually probably wouldn't take too long even if it was. But when you click Create MP4 down here in the corner, it will ask you for a name of your file. I'll just call this movie. And I hit save. And then you see a status icon over on the bottom right. So this takes just a little time to go ahead and create this MP4 movie. And then once it's created, then I see, for example, on my screen here, this MP4 pops up within my Finder, and I can open up this movie file and then go ahead and play that animation. Again, on my screen, this looks really nice. There's no jitter in terms of the point moving. Hopefully the quality of the video you're seeing also shows that, but just so you're aware, I would definitely try it for yourself and make sure that you're satisfied with the way that it looks. Okay, so we made an animation, and we very quickly made an MP4 from that animation. Any of you who've maybe used the program for a while, this create movie window is something that I believe it was released in maybe the last version of DataGraph. So it's a relatively new interface that we updated the old interface for creating movies. And part of the idea was that it would allow you to preview this before you actually create the MP4 file. And there's other options that we can possibly add in the future of maybe adding other clips into there. I'm not sure we'll get that advanced. We haven't necessarily had that requested, but at the same time, it allows you to create the movie and have the movie being created. And if it is a long movie and it takes a bit of time, you can work on other things within the program while that's being done. So it shouldn't slow you down. Okay, so we have made now our first movie, and we've done this first simple example. And I see that there's a question. The question is, it requires the range of t to be the same as that of x. Otherwise, we would need a separate column for x as a function of t. Yes, I deliberately set up the range of the animation variable to be exactly the same as the range of my x variable in order to make that work. And actually, that's a great question to ask, in the sense that it's almost prompted me perfectly into a segue on something that we've been working on, which is to allow variables to be something that you can specify within this range. So currently, and maybe this is where this question is coming from, currently the range does have to be something that you set manually based on what you know of the data and what you want it to be. That will be, I believe, in the next beta coming out pretty shortly, where the range is something that could be variable. So for example, you could have those of you who haven't done this before, it's very handy to control click on your column. You can get some options here. For example, I can get the maximum and minimum from my column as a variable. So I would, this would be my min. I can do the same thing as a shortcut here, number from column, select the max. So now I have two variables, 0 and 5 here, and the idea would be that I'd be able to just type in the min and the max variables into my range to move them. Okay, and Great. So thank you for that question. And the same thing will be true for the slider variable. If you ever use the slider in and of itself, then when you click on the slider now, you have to type in numbers into the range. And there's a workaround that we have showed people to use an expression. So you could have this depend on variables, but it's a little, takes a few more steps to get that to work. So the slider, this is how we started this actually, was allowing the slider to be variables, that where you could set variables on the slider range. And as an added bonus, the same functionality is used within the animation variable that will allow you to do that. Okay, great. So now let me go ahead and just delete that slider. So then the next thing that I wanted to show you is related to the fact that the file that you have, this example file that I showed, has a reveal also shown in it, such that when you move your point along the line, you only see you see the trace as it's moving along to the next point. And this is something that is worth sort of understanding, because I think I've had this question before: how do I add a trace to a point as it's moved? And there's a little trick to doing this, because the temptation may be to use a mask. Masks are typically how we limit data within DataGraph. So for example, if I said on this particular command, if I designated a mask, so I only wanted to draw this line when the value for X was less than or equal to T, for example, then if I play my animation, that's not what I'm looking for, right? That looks, and now it's looping, it looks sort of strange, because it's really not going to draw that complete line until that next point is included in the range. I'm going to Command Z, adding the mask, because that's not what I want to do here. Instead, what I'm going to do is use what we refer to as a reveal. What you're doing is you're actually creating the command that draws the entire line, but you're only revealing part of it at a time. To do that, we're going to add a group. So click on the group icon in the upper right. And we're also going to add, first of all, a region command. There's actually a couple of different ways that you can do this with different commands. The example that I have, that I sent you, is with a region. That's also is why you see that gray background shown when you run that sample file. So the region command just on its own allows you to specify intervals in all sorts of ways. It's actually a kind of a cool command, and worth spending some time with, understanding some of these options and how they work. What we're doing here is we're going to apply the same variable T to this region. Now, when I move my variable back and forth, you'll see that the region that's being highlighted is also changing with my variable. So I haven't done anything yet with the line, but I have now added this again, I'm adding the machinery to let me to do this properly. And the actual, let me see if I can go ahead and use my, oops, this is not going to let me, I wanted to try and draw this on the screen. It's not going to let me do it. So I'll just go ahead and use the mouse. Hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here. So in this group command, when you add a group, there is a section underneath for a shared mask. There's also this option for clip width. If you've never used this before, this is the functionality that allows us to create this reveal. And I'm going to clip the range of the commands within that group with my region command that I've created up above. Now, when I hit play, you'll see that both the point and the line are drawn together. And it's because I'm not using a mask. I'm drawing the entire thing, but I'm only revealing a portion of it as we go along. Okay, just doing a bit of a time check, make sure that we get through all this. So now we have, I think we're getting pretty close to the complete second graph that you have in that example file, for the most part, I think that this is basically there. So you can see the point, you can see the line, and you can see how the value is being interpolated, the value changing in our data table as we move along. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and let's hide what we started with. This was our first example, simple example there. We'll hide that data. Now we want to do another version of this that is a bit more sophisticated. And for this functionality, we did add a column that was a column type that was very motivated by the desire to do this kind of thing properly. And the data set that you see here, this is what's used in the third example graph that's from that file. This is another set of data where we want to be able to draw lines, and we want to interpolate between the X or interpolate between our Y values. But the data that you see here is grouped by a category, and just, you know, 3 simple categories: category A, category B, category C. And again, this is a much simpler example than the data that you might be interested in ultimately animating, but it's the same basic 3 columns. In our COVID data sets, for example, we would have a group being country, our X value would be the dates, and our Y values that we would want to use would be in the animation that we're going to look at is the number of cases or the number of deaths that have been reported for a particular country on a particular day. So again, we'll start with this simple example first. And this is my underlying data set that I'm going to use, and the column type that I'm going to use in order to create this animation of these 3 lines is called the Interpolate by Category column. And similar to the interpolation column that we did with the simple example, we're going to create this machinery in our data table that allows us to draw the data in the way that we want to. Let me go ahead and add a vertical column divider. And one aspect of this that we need is I first need a column that I'm going to indicate what categories or what labels here, what groups do I want to interpolate in terms of what I'm seeing on my screen. And there's the handy way to get a column of unique values from a column like this where I have the data repeated. And to do that, I can just go to my column and control click on that column. And actually, maybe I need to do this in the header. There we go. So if you do this from the control click on the header, or I use the 2 fingers on my touchpad, and there's an option for copy unique entries. I'm going to select that, go away from that part of the table in my interface, Command V, and now I've pasted in a column of my A, B, and C. Again, I could have just easily typed this, but because you want to, again, do this with more sophisticated data sets, that copy unique entries can be really handy. So we have our 3 groups, A, B, and C, and now I want to show you how we're going to do this interpolation. Okay. So first, go to the other drop-down menu, and you would select Interpolate by Category. That creates this special category that's meant for this type of analysis, where the top 3 entries here, category X and Y, this is where we're going to specify our data set that we are using as a basis for this analysis. I can just click and drag on the names. I find this to be a lot faster for me than using the menus. Now I have the input data set up. Now I want to specify the locations where I'm going to have my output. The name here is maybe not as great as it should be. We call the first one category, the second entry here, or the entry below, this is called label. This is basically the categories that you want out. So if you hover over that field, the tooltip is that this is the output category. So I can select my second group column, and actually let me call this something slightly different just to keep these clear. Here's my group out. And then I need to tell it, where do you want the value for the group out? Where are you interpolating? And just like I did for my simple example, I'm going to use T as where I'm interpolating this value. And if I go ahead and drag my slider for my animation variable, you can see how these values change. So this will be my, let's see, I called this Y out last time. We'll do the same thing here. Now let me plot some of this data so you can see what's going on. First of all, if I want to plot these lines, I can highlight my X and Y column, hit a plot command. Because I want these to show as three separate lines, I'm going to only connect when X increases. Now you can see the 3 lines. If you want to see where the points are at those, we can also add those in. I'd probably make this one much smaller. And now I want to overlay the points on top of each of these. Again, that's going to be another points command. I think I'll just take the one that I have from here, drag it, drop it onto this one, but I'm going to change my, my values here. Let me see how I have this on this side. Too many windows covering up what I'm working with here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so same thing. Our X, we're going to change this to specified. This will be T, and my Y value is now Y out. So now, if I change this point to be much bigger, just so you can really see this here, and I play this animation, now I have the animation going throughout the entire thing, and I'm interpolating for both A, B, and C what the value is for each of those categories at the appropriate X location. And let's see what else. Oh, and in terms of the reveal, this can be pretty easy to, again, take some of the machinery we've already created. I have this region command I've already set up. I don't need to do it again. You can take the command, either do a copy paste to another graph, or it's just simply quick to click it and drag it into this other thumbnail. So now I have that same reveal here. I'm going to move that up to the top, so my points are drawn underneath that. And even the group itself is already set up correctly. So I think I should be able to copy this and paste it over here. This looks good. I'm going to move my appropriate command there. And again, now if I hit play, you should see that moving. So I did that last part fast, but hopefully you can, again, since you have this file, see how all of this fits together and be able to recreate that. So the next thing that I did is the moving bars example in combination with this. And to do the moving bars, it's a little bit more tricky, because what we want to use is the bars command, and we have some additional things we have to calculate in order to get that movement correct between the bars as they jump from one location to another location. So let me show you how we will go ahead and do that. First of all, if you have never used the bars command before, it is one of the commands that's, oh, sorry, this is one of the reasons I'm not always thrilled with these names being so close to each other. It's not the bars command, it's the bar command. I actually sort of like calling this the bar plot, because the bar command is a way to really look at data or to not just do side-by-side bars and categorical bars, but to plot data using bars, but on a numerical scale. So this is very different than a side-by-side bar graph. So for example, if I add a, just to illustrate a little bit about this command, I add a bar command, and if I have the values being my animated values, and the locations, the where being also my values that I have here, maybe you can kind of see how now the bars themselves are moving around. So I can change the location of the bars with the bar command, or again, what I sort of think of as the bar plot. If you want to learn more about that, I'd really recommend going to the help menu, going to the knowledge base. In fact, well, you can certainly go to the help menu for this particular command. Let me pull this up for you, actually. So you can see the help for the bar command in the knowledge base is showing you how the bar command, again, allows you to place bars on a numeric scale on an XY axis. There's a lot of customization you can do within this command. It's almost deceivingly simple. But another thing that I think is worth checking out, if you haven't gone into the system that much yet, there's a page on how to make a bar graph that I think does a nice job comparing these two commands and helping you to get a sense of the differences between them. So anyway, let me go ahead and, oh, in fact, as long as I have this open, one of the things that we're going to need to use for this, for the moving bar, is we're going to need to use a couple of functions within DataGraph. And if you go into the knowledge base, you can search on the words function reference. Actually, I think if you just start typing function, this will pop up in the search bar. And we have a list of all these different functions that are available. The three that we're going to use today are the floor function, the ceiling function, and there's also the mod function. So just really quickly, if you're not familiar with these, floor is a way of rounding. So if I have a number 4.5, for example, if I say floor of 4.5, I'll get the value for 4. Ceiling of 4.5 will give me the value of 5. And the mod function is also something that we're going to use, and that will give you the remainder after division. This is a handy little function. I hadn't really used a mod function much before using DataGraph, but we're gonna need this again in our machinery to create this moving bar graph. Go ahead and move this back out, and now let's look at this again. Okay, so you'll notice, and actually I think I'll just go ahead and show you the in the interest of time and making sure we spend more time also on the COVID data. The machinery here that I'm going to pull together, what we've done so far is we've created this column, group out, and the interpolated column of Y out, or what this is an input. This is something that's calculated, but you'll notice that there are these other columns here: Y now, Y next, rank now, rank next, and bar location. And these columns are just needed for the moving bars. And if you notice down in the variables section, there's a number of different variables here. And these are, again, these three functions that we're using to create this moving bar example. We have the floor function, the ceiling function, and again, the mod function. And what these variables are doing is they're being used to tease apart the value that I have for the animation variable. Because in my moving bars, if I change this, move this around, for example, I need to know as I'm moving, as I'm animating this at a particular time point, I need to know not just the rank of my data at the current time, but I need to rank the data at the next time. So that's where these values are being used. If I move my time variable up to, here I have 2.84, then what the floor does is it rounds down to the value of 2. This would be the current time segment I'm in. The future time segment I'm going to is 3. So that's what I get for the variable ceiling of t, is giving me that future time. And then the mod function is giving me the remainder for that number. So I'm doing a mod of 1, which means it's the remainder after I divide by 1. If my number is then 2.84, I get back 0.84. So I'm really teasing apart that value of the animation variable in order to be able to identify really how the rank is changing. So what you can see is, there's a couple of things here. This is the value that I already created from interpolating. So if you go over to the column here, you'll see this, again, interpolate by category, set up the way that we had just done from scratch. The column underneath is another interpolate by category column, but instead of being at time t, it's at time current. That means as I move my variable, you'll notice that the why now and why next are only changing when I change between time increments rather than being continuous like the why out. Again, I use the interpolate by category to get all 3 of these columns, the values of y, but then I need to know, how do I rank this data? Because if all I do is use the current order, then my bars are not going to be ranked from highest to lowest. So this is an important component of why I think these moving bars graphs are something that people so eye-catching, is because you see this ranking happening in real time as you're playing this, and you can see that movement. So what we have here is a column that is another, or this is an expression column. Actually, I think in this video we haven't really used expressions much yet. But in order to create this, I'll just show you, in fact, the way that I created these. I would go to my column that I created for the interpolation, and if I click the gear menu there's a number of shortcuts here. And one of these is to be able to sort the data that you have. So if I go to the map, click on the gear menu, go to mapping shortcuts, click sort, an expression column gets created that is the sorted version of that data. So this is the one that I just created. It's actually the same order that you see here. But if you tease out this expression, it's actually using this, what we call a column property called sort with. And this is maybe one of the more complicated things about this process. It's telling me for the column why now, give me return the value at this particular sorting in a sorted way. But it's doing this by using this sort with property. So I can actually just delete the first part of that, and I get why now dot sort with. So really, another way to do this would be to just create an expression column, and you would type in, I'll just copy and paste it here, why now dot sort with, and it will give you a sorted version of those indices. Now for the time period I was on, it just looked like a sorted list, 1, 2, 3, but you can see here, in fact, now it's giving me the rank order of these values. So it's telling me A is rank 1, C is rank 2, B is rank 3. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just remove those and just point out that these columns rank now and rank next, that's exactly what they're doing. They're using this sort now or sort with column property in order to get a ranked version of each of these bars. And that ranked version is what we then use to determine the actual bar location. So the ranking, if I just use the current ranking value, we change this to rank now, and I ran my animation, what you would see is things flip. You can see maybe this is flipping very quickly. It's really not doing this in a very smooth way. So instead, what I do is I use one more column. So this is the final calculation for this moving bar graph, and it's called bar location. If you open up the expression for this, what it's doing is it's using and it's weighting the values between the current rank and the future rank, and that's the location that's used for the y-axis. To do that weighting of those values, we're using this modulo function. That's where that comes in. And you can go ahead and look at that equation that I've set up here in order to use that fractional value to weight these values that you see here. Now, so hopefully that doesn't seem too complicated. I've set up the machinery for you so that this is something that you could use. But in this simple example, just to be clear, this is all based on an increment that we're interested in of 1. So we're interested in time segments changing from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3, and so on. In your more complicated examples that we're going to look at in a moment, we'll be using dates, so it's slightly different in order to get those to work properly. But in any case, this is the basic machinery that all of these examples that you'll see for both the animating points, revealing lines, and doing moving bars. It's all based on this underlying, all these techniques that I've showed you. And the last thing that I did here is just use a graph command where I'm composing the two images that I've created, and you can see both the moving bars and the lines and the points at the same time, which I thought was kind of a nice way to view the data in a more complete way. Okay, so if you have any questions on that, I'm not seeing anything. So we'll go ahead and get into the next example, or the other example that I want to show you. Okay, and this is, again, a simpler version of the animation I want to give you a sense of how I created. Actually, let me go ahead and see if I have the main file here. This is using data that's from, data that's from a variety of different countries on both cases reported in different countries and deaths reported in different countries from the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. This is an animation that we've posted. This is also in your online examples. And here you see these different points for different countries that if I move this animate variable, we see these points also moving along. So let me go ahead and show you, again, just breaking it down a little bit simpler. Here's a file that has this raw data that I've brought in where you can see here's the dates, here's different countries, and we have both cases and deaths reported for all these countries. So in order to animate this data, what I tend to do is to try and keep my data source, the raw data that I've downloaded, in its own group and not combine it with my other expressions. So it makes it a lot easier to update. So for example, this file that I've updated is, that I've imported into this, or this data that I've imported into this file, I can update by downloading the new file and just literally dragging it and dropping it right on this group. and everything will be updated. So there's a real advantage to trying to keep the raw data separate from where we process the actual data. So what I have here is just showing you how you can start to, again, use these interpolation methods to process this data to create different types of animations. What I did first to start with, again, looking at the raw data, you can use this technique. If you don't have a list of countries, or you're not sure if the country names are the same in your list as they are here, and you want to use unique countries, you can control click on this, copy unique entries, and then I would just go ahead and paste in a list of all the countries that are coming from my data. Then I would want to use that interpolate by category column to get the values at particular times. So in order to do this, it's handy to, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you could do this. I guess just to start with the simplest way, I've already created some variables here, but you could type in the date range you're interested in the animation variable itself. If you haven't worked with dates a lot within DataGraph, then the format for a date as a variable is to first type the year, month, day, I could therefore type in 2020 02 01. If I want to start in February, then I would do a comma, and that would be my beginning time period. Then I could type 2020 05 01 to go to have my range go over that time period. Again, right now, I'd have to type that in manually. And then if you look at the animation variable changing, you'll see how it changes in time with that value. I find that this is a little bit difficult to do, just in the sense that we don't have a lot of room to type in this range variable, or to type dates within the range. And because it doesn't allow me to use variables, what I've been doing for these animations, if you look in the range, they'll be from 0 to 1, or possibly, 0, 1, or they may be a little bit beyond 1, which is giving me sort of a buffer. And okay, great. We just got someone joining us for the webinar, so thanks for joining. And I am recording this for anyone who's interested. What we've been doing is actually starting to post these on YouTube. We also will be sending you a link afterwards to be able to watch this. Okay, so now I've changed this so my range is just from 0 to 1, and notice how there's a couple of variables that I have in my that I've already created here. And these are coming from my data. If you look at my downloaded CSV, I have this column of date rep. And what I've done is I've created a variable that pulls the minimum and maximum dates out of this column. This is also really handy because then anytime I update my data, this variable will also be updated. This is using a variable type called number from column. So a descriptive way to describe this column type, or variable type. So when you create these, you would just click that. I can open this up, pick the column that I would want to create this, pull this data from. And if I, again, pick the maximum value from my date column, then I get a variable that represents that. So what I've done here is I've left, again, my time variable, or my animation variable, is going from 0 to 1. And then I use an expression in order to have a time variable that's based on the min and the max. And you can see this expression here. I'm just taking the minimum date and adding the maximum minus the min times the time variable. So this is going to be a fraction from 0 to 1. Notice that the dates that I have here are in date format. The expression variable maybe should be a little bit smarter about knowing this is a date, but the fact that it's showing me this number, that's actually the number underlying the date. If you're not familiar with how dates are saved, what a lot of programs do, and DataGraph does as well, is that dates are actually the number of seconds from January 1st, 1970. So it may seem a little strange at first, but that's a very typical way that dates are represented in computer programs. So this is actually a very big number because it's literally the number in seconds from that date. So if I change my slider here, I'm going to change that. And what I've done in the group here is, again, I've used a unique column of all my countries, and I have added 2 interpolation by category columns that are using the raw data, my countries, dates, deaths column, the same thing with cases, and these are all coming from the data that you see here that we downloaded. Now, if I look at this column and I change my animation variable, you can see how these numbers are changing along the way. And if you want to, just checking my time here since we're getting close to the end of the hour. If you want to see how I would use these in a graph, let me just do a new one, then I'll show you in a moment the graph that I've created here. I could take these data, create a point command with them. We can go ahead and, why don't I just make these a different color so you can hopefully see these a little bit better. Well, I'll go ahead and, if you put these on a log scale, which is what I had done in the animation that I did, if I move these around on their own, notice how the scale again changes. So what I did for this animation, for the complete one that's in the example files, is I added in to the range these larger values within my data set. You can use a variable to do that, or you can open up the axis settings to do it, or you can just double click on the axis itself, and I could say 10, this looks like 10 to the 5, if I have that correct. And on the other end, I could do the same thing. Okay. And actually, the way that I had this in, just do this the same way. That makes more sense. If I have there we go. Okay. So anyway, so now we have on the x-axis, we have the number of cases. On the y-axis, we have the reported, actually not the Y group. I'm using a token here to add the label. There we go. So those will be connected to my data. So now if I run this animation, you can see it's not as jittery, but there's still some jitter going on there. And that's because I also would need to set the lower range. So I can do that too by adding a lower bound to my data. We'll just type in a much smaller number. Now things are a little bit smoother. Again, here's just 2 points. But as we, basically what I do is usually play with it a bit to try and get the right range of the X and Y axis. You can also, again, use variables to do this, but it will give you, this is maybe a little bit too low on that end. And on this end, maybe a little too high. I can also just click and drag on the screen to get a range that looks a little bit better. And then the other things that you can do with this are I can add labels. So if I go in my points command and I want to use the countries and territories here as a label, I can go ahead and do that. now you're going to see the country label on each one of these as they move. So I'm not going to make the entire animation exactly as you see it because there's a lot of other formatting in there, but at least you can see the machinery again that pulls this together. The last thing I wanted to show you before we break, and if anyone does have a question, go ahead and submit that now, but I'll just show you one more thing that I've done within this file is to note that you don't have to show the full list of countries. Masking, again, would be one way to limit it, but because we're using this interpolate by category column, I can have a group that I have here, for example. This is the same thing that I set up before. I'm interpolating using my, using my raw data, and then I'm using my time variable that I've set up, but I'm typing in or copying and pasting the names of the countries. So here I just have 2 countries that I could look at. And these are the countries that I have plotted here. Again, I would need to kind of probably expand this range out a bit to have this make sense. But now you could see these points for these 2 countries as we move along. Let's see, there they are. So again, my range is a little bit jittery here. You can see this can take a little bit of effort, but another way to do this is just to say, let's restrict my range on the axis so it won't go above or below a certain point. So now I would see my points. It looks like one of them is really going up and down here. But play with that. You know, you can play with the different ranges so that the points move smoothly and you can create the movies. So hopefully this was helpful. We went ahead and we showed you a simple example. We created the movies or created a movie. We showed you the interpolation column and the interpolate by category column. And I, you know, again, I hope that this was helpful. I don't see any other questions being posed, so we'll go ahead and end the webinar. I just got some positive feedback, so we definitely appreciate that. And also go under the example files that are online. And if you type in the word animate, you'll see that there's a bunch of other ones that we have created. There's an animated or moving bar graph there. There's also one with hurricane data where we're actually overlaying the hurricane data, latitude, longitude, onto a map of the world that I think is pretty cool. The population pyramid one is also an interesting animation of future population projections. So anyway, I hope that you have a great weekend, and we will go ahead and continue to have these Friday webinars. If you have any topics you'd like to see, let us know. Take care.